Hello, and tonight we are having a public hearing for a potential cultivated oyster mariculture site, proposed site grow out facility in East Galveston Bay, and this would be G-0016. The purpose of this public hearing is to provide information on cultivated oyster mariculture, and in specific, this proposed grow out facility in East Galveston Bay, answers questions related to this proposed facility, and give instructions on how to submit public comment. So first, a little bit of background on cultivated oyster mariculture. You will often hear me abbreviate that as CALM throughout this presentation, is that TPWD permits the activity of CALM in grow out sites, so growing to market size, and the nursery hatchery facilities. This is off-bottom mariculture, so all gear can be anchored to the bottom, but it floats in the water column. Applicants nominate their own sites and conduct a natural resource survey prior to their application or as part of their application. The permit is a 10-year term. Only the Eastern oyster, that's the common name, from Texas broodstock are allowed. Here, I'm going to go over 3 types of common gear that you will see. Starting, we'll have the floating bags. So these are large mesh, have holes in them, bags made out of a sturdy plastic type material that have floats underneath on the sides, so the oysters are in the bag. They can be floated face down where the oysters are down in the water, or you can flip them as in this one is in a drying position to allow desiccation for any algae or other type of biofouling. From there, you also have a floating cage system. So these are large cages that contain smaller versions of these floating bags within a larger cage framework. And again, you have floats where the oysters can be in the feeding position, so the oysters are down in the water column, or flipped over in the desiccation position. Another type of gear is the adjustable longline system, where oysters are held in these smaller cages, also called oyster baskets, along a line. And then that line, there's different positions on poles that hold it in the water. So lower down in the water column and feeding, and the line can be raised up for that desiccation, sorting, harvesting for those. The annual fee, once a site is permitted, there's an annual fee based on the size of the site for both the grow out and the nursery hatchery. Before you get that final permit, they must also get other authorizations from other agencies, such as the General Land Office, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, Army Corps of Engineers, and U.S. Coast Guard. We do have an active use criteria wherein that there's a certain number of oyster seed, 100,000 oyster seed per acre permitted planted each year, so that we know these sites are being used. Year-round harvest is allowed, however, you must comply with all Texas Department of State Health Services regulations. And just a little bit on that Department of State Health Services, that is the agency that does water classifications. So they divide this is just for oyster harvest, divide into areas, and they classify the water, harvest water, the water that the oysters are harvested from. So there are open, approved, conditionally approved, that's where grow out locations can occur. And when those are open by the health department, sometimes they will have to be closed for various elevated levels of bacteria, maybe after large rainfalls, or if there was a red tide in the area, then that area is closed. And when the health department closes those areas, the mariculture, while they may tend their oysters, they cannot harvest their oysters. That water classification, so if you see a water classification of restricted, that has no implications on water access by the public or recreation activities. Again, that's all based on oyster harvest. TPWD is not involved in the classification of the water for human health. Again, that's the Texas Department of State Health Services, and you can visit their website for more information on water classification. So this proposed site, which would be G-0016, is a oyster grow out facility, so growing out to the large size to go to market. It is located in East Galveston Bay, and so in the Galveston Bay system, East Galveston Bay, and then here's a closer up of where the location is, and then finally even closer of the proposed site and the shoreline. It is harvest area TX1, and the proposed site will be 4.98 acres. The proposed routes to the site, leaving from their base of operations, cutting across the Intercoastal Highway, that's near where the Stingaree Marina, local landmark you might see, and then boating over to the site. So access via boat. Operations summary, that the gear will be the floating cage gear. There will be 2 columns across the site with 24 rows of cages within that column, and I'll show a layout of that next. They will be using platypus anchors. Here's an example of those anchors that go down and get set into the sediment for each line, and there will be buoys to mark the endpoints where those anchors are. They'll be using a nylon braided rope lines of 5/8 inch. They will follow navigational markers per the U.S. Coast Guard recommendations. They would like to use these lighted buoys that stick up, and they have a solar light on top. And again, that's after the Coast Guard evaluates if they request more or not. The bird deterrent system that they would use if needed would be the bird away hawk system. So it is like a kite shaped like a hawk on a line, and that line will be a visible line so birds do not get entangled in it. Here's an example, or here is their site layout. So this inset shows how far they are, just over 1,500 feet from the nearest shoreline. And then across the site, here's the 2 columns, and then the different lines. And each one of these black square rectangles represents a cage. There will be 6 feet of space in between each cage and 20 feet of space in between each line with a 23-foot corridor. And these lines will be offset by 3 feet. So the anchor lines, there's no crossing or chafing on those. Here's a cross-sectional view, again, anchored to the bottom on either end, then that main line comes up, and then each cage has 2 individual tether points to that main line for that. And the cages can again either be in that feeding position where the floats are up, or flipped in the desiccation position where the floats are down, the oysters up. And if needed, these can be sunk to the bottom. That would be in the case of a tropical storm. They will access the site by boat 4 to 6 days a week and do all their tending of their gear with that boat. Gear will be taken to their base of operations to shore, not that near shoreline, but a different location on shore for any sort of cleaning and repairs. And they plan to do sorting and tumbling of oysters at their dock. The oysters would then go back to the site before they could be harvested. The hurricane plan follows the suggested sea grant overall suggested storm preparation. So that is a 3-tiered code yellow, orange, and red as a storm is named, and within the Gulf as it may get closer to the cone of uncertainty, and then within the cone of uncertainty. They plan that if a storm would be coming over to sink their cages, and pre-storm they will be practicing sinking their cages, maintaining their gear. Post-storm they would then assess their damage, retrieve any lost gear, refloat, and redeploy the gear. For the Natural Resource Survey, they did side scan along with sediment grabs. So this is a layout of where the different grab samples were, both within the site, the yellow, within the 200-foot buffer, that blue, and the red indicates the lines of the side scan. The sediment samples and the side scan found the bottom area to be composed of mud or some mud and sand, and no presence of oyster habitat or seagrass were detected, either within the site or the buffers. The next step for this proposed site is open for public comments. The deadline for public comments is February the 27th. 2024. To submit public comment, email oyster.mariculture@tpwd.texas.gov. After that 2-week period where open for public comment, if there were any public comments that we needed to address, we would then address those issues of the public comment. If there's not, then the conditional permit is issued. That permit does not allow mariculture activities to begin, but they take that conditional permit and seek the authorizations from those other state and federal agencies that will look for that conditional permit to make sure TPWD has said, yes, once they get this, we approve of this. After they gather all those, then a final permit can be issued, and after that first year's annual fee has been received and mariculture activity can begin. That's when gear can go in the water and oysters go in the water. So again, public comment period is open till February the 27th, and you would email oyster.mariculture@tpwd.texas.gov. With that, that's the end of our presentation.